Run. Hi, everyone. This is Anna. Some of you know me on Facebook as Anna Sophia Canetti. Some of you know my last name, but almost no one can pronounce or spell it, so that's okay. I am. I have been a libertarian activist for quite some time now, and I have decided to embark on this journey of interviewing some of the people that I have met in the movement and see what's going on all over the country and locally in different states and who's doing what. So welcome to the show. And tonight with us, we have Kim Ruff, who is a presidential candidate from the Libertarian Party. And Kim, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. My name is Kim Ruff. I am 38 years old. I'm a native Arizonan. I work in manufacturing. Specifically, I'm an operations director at a plastic and steel fabrication plant. I'm educated with degrees in film, communication, and political science. I've worked in the Libertarian Party since 2009 in a variety of roles and capacities, and I decided to step up and run for office because it's time we, the activists who speak this message on the ground, step up and speak out.
Yes, definitely. I think a lot of people are very excited for your run for presidency, and I'm very, very happy to see all of this commotion and excitement that people are stepping up as well, you know, to support each other. I think this is great, a great moment in our movement. So I want to start talking first about what's going on locally in Arizona as far as the political climate, ballot access, and so forth.
Okay. Well, in Arizona politics, we historically had been a Goldwater state. Barry Goldwater had been our senator for, I believe, upwards of 30 years, as well as having run as president on the Republican Party ticket in 1964. So we sort of came from this pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, and there was something distinctly libertarian in our message, because even Barry Goldwater said you don't have to be straight to shoot straight. Now, granted, he was strong on national defense, but at least he recognized the validity of letting anyone take on whatever role they so desired. So we kind of came from that mentality, and then we had a bit of a political shift when McCain took office after Goldwater passed. McCain is not historically from Arizona, whereas Goldwater was our native son. And even though he had a pretty interesting and long career in the military, I don't think that he was as Republican or as staunchly pro-states' rights, limited federal government as Goldwater had been. So there was a bit of a sociopolitical shift in Arizona. And then very recently, after McCain has passed, now we have a full-bore Democrat in the Senate named Kirsten Sinema, who is so very left. She's practically fallen off the spectrum. But interestingly enough, she ran a very moderate campaign, which is just illustrative of how much we've changed nationally in terms of our opinion of government. If you can be so pro-government intervention in every single facet of our lives, clearly we've been properly indoctrinated into this mindset. So Phoenix, the state capital and the very largest city in Arizona, as well as the fifth largest in the world, is much more blue than the balance of the state. And truly the balance of the state, even though it typically leans Republican in the polls, they are very much libertarian in their mentality. So that's kind of the overall landscape of Arizona. Outlying Arizona, small towns. Bisbee, in fact, the city itself decided to legalize gay marriage. And Doug Stanhope, who's a stand-up comedian and a libertarian, lives there. So sometimes when I go down to visit, I'm hoping I run into him at a bar. But we have this just very libertarian culture, with the exception of our capital, which, because of the influx of Californians, that sort of changed the landscape.
No, about
no offense to you, but you're still there, so.
No, about Californians. I mean, I hear a lot of things about, California. I'm sure you've heard that one.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of things about taxes and all these things that aren't actually accurate.
Hmm.
It's true that the two biggest cities here, Los Angeles and San Francisco, followed by, I would say, probably San Jose,
Hmm.
are very blue. Where I live in San Diego is a lot more Republican than Democrat.
Interesting. Why is that, you think?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Well, you know what? I'll just throw out a theory there. There are a lot of retired people here and a lot of military retired people.
Oh, that's right, because San Diego is a major training hub for the Marines.
Yes, yes.
Right. I forgot
So
about that.
right. So it used to be completely a military town. It's not anything like that anymore. But I think that's a part of it. But I think that people don't realize that California, aside from those cities, is not that blue.
Right.
And
Yeah, no, that's true. I think that's actually a pretty good misnomer regarding most states because having lived in New York for a year because of the military, it was astonishing to see how strong the liberty movement was there and how varied the landscape was. Because if you're in upstate or western New York, it's very much more conservative and they typically vote Republican.
right,
Whereas downstate, where you're dealing with, New York City proper and that area, very, very, very blue. But we would always, even in the year that I lived there, I'm like, I live here now. I'm one of you. I adopt your identity. But even living in, Western New York, there was sort of this sentiment where you're like, to hell with downstate. It's upstate and Western New York, like that's our people. So it is pretty interesting. And we sort of forget that. We only look at the major cities, not the aggregate of the people.
right. And then there's the other part where people think that taxes are very high here. But I always give this comparison. For example, this is the biggest tax, property tax, right? In San Diego, it's 1.5%.
Hmm.
In Chicago, it's 10%.
Right.
Now, if you take that, and think about $1 million house or even a $500,000 house, that's so much more in such a much bigger difference than you could possibly think in any kind of income tax.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that one too, because that was something that I noticed both in New York and just in general at looking at property, is that when we look at property, we think, okay, this is the value of the house, and we rarely ever consider the impact property tax has on it. So,
Right.
but if you look at, you could buy a house actually, I can give you a really good example that's one to one. In 2011, I bought a house in Central Phoenix that was built in 1944 for 100 grand. And my house payment, because of our property tax level, was about 535 bucks a month, which is stupid good. It was an $80,000 loan I took. I put down a 20% down payment, and then on an $80,000 loan, 535 bucks a month. It's awesome. You can't even rent a terrible apartment in Arizona for that price.
No, that's a great deal.
Right. But then when I moved to New York, so we sold the house in 2014. We lived for about 6 months. We were TDY in Little Rock, Arkansas. And then in the very tail end of 2014, we purchased a house in Lockport, New York. Now, Lockport sits in Niagara County, which of the 63 different counties in New York has the highest property tax of the entire state. Like you would think it would be in Manhattan, but it's not. It's in Niagara County. So we bought a house there for about 75,000, so almost comparable to the purchase price on my loan for Phoenix. And with the property tax values, our home payment was $900 a month. Like that's how much radically different it was just because of property tax. So
Right.
sometimes we look at Idaho, we think like Idaho, you can get, entire row of houses for a song. But if they have extraordinarily high property tax, that's going to negatively impact your ability to afford it.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Especially if you're trying to have rentals.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a miserable experience because then you're like, how do I make this competitive on the market when I have to somehow amortize this payment across all these rents that I'm charging.
Right. Right. I mean, I've been very fortunate here. Um, I mean, I bought my properties right after the, what do you call it? The crash.
And what was that, 2009, 2008 into
Right.
2009?
So I bought in 2010. So I got very fortunate, but I don't know how people can afford to buy new homes here because to get just a nice decent two-bedroom condo in a nice neighborhood, you're looking at almost $1 million.
Yeah, do you ever watch it's not Home and Garden, it's whatever that channel is that deals strictly with property. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't have TV.
Oh, well, then you're the smarter one amongst us. But there is a whole channel dedicated to basically property, whether it's like fixing up a house or remodeling a house or, doing interior decoration or how are we going to flip this house? It all deals with homes
Right.
and decoration and of that nature. They
Okay.
have a show on it where they have people who look at, they work with a realtor and they say, okay, this is the general areas I want to live. This is my budget, help me find a property that works with me and my lifestyle. But the budget they have is always like 400 grand or greater. And I'm like, who the hell has 400 grand that they're
That
like, I'm going to buy a house. This is my budget. Like, that's not my budget. My budget, man, even this house in Central Phoenix, I said it was such a disaster. The bubble burst on the homeowners. They bought it for $250,000. The bubble burst. They defaulted on their loan. The bank purchased it back. Then the bank tried to sell it at the purchase price, so $250,000. Nobody bet an auction. So the bank took it back again and then collected on insurance twice or some nonsense and then put it back on the market for 100 grand. So I was like, this is my best offer. And then my realtor's like, can you go any higher? And I'm like, no, because I could not do more than 100 grand. So I just think it's funny when people are like, $650,000. What do you got for me? Like, I have a whole block of row houses in Detroit. That's what I have for you. You own a city now.
Yeah, but in the end, I mean, property taxes here are very, very low. So that makes it worth it if you can make the
Yeah.
investment. But I've seen, I've lived here for 23 years in San Diego, and pretty much almost every one of my friends left the state.
Is it something you said? I'm just teasing.
Yes, I know. I'm really, really, really impossible to deal with. But it's usually when it comes time that they want to start a family and they want
Mm,
to buy a house, they just can't here.
mm.
But the other part to it is that once you leave, because the income is also higher here, once you leave, it's really hard to come back.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That is a good point. Forget
Right.
about the fact that sometimes there are cost of living increases in people's income. So if they're already living in the area, they probably maybe make an income that's commensurate to the purchase price of things.
Right. But once you leave, if you leave California and go live in, I don't know, Kentucky, you're going to be doing the same job, but you're going to be making a third of the money. You might live just as well there, as far as affordability and things, but that's your income now. So
Right.
it's going to be really hard to come back here with that income history.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's all of that is sad, but I'm not leaving.
Annie, get your gun. It's time to defend some property.
Yes. Oh yeah, we'll talk about guns later. That's another very interesting topic. So the second topic we wanted to get to is outreach, and what I want to talk about is how do you talk to people who maybe aren't familiar with the Libertarian Party or the Libertarian movement, or maybe are apathetic or just unpolitical? How do you approach them?
I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to explain this by way of anecdote, but I
Okay.
want to make it perfectly clear that I'm not comparing the average American voter at all to a child. So I just want to put that disclaimer on it, and then I'll tell my story and kind of roll into your question.
Okay.
So one of the things that has massively changed for me has been having children. And a lot of it has to do with just the extraordinary amount of patience you need to be able to take care of a child. And how much it teaches you to be mindful of their experience as individuals and cognizant of their feelings. Kind of be aware that they are trying to understand their world, and in so doing, they're kind of stumble on something that's inaccurate, and it's your job to gently guide them back on path. And that has been hugely beneficial to my personality, because even though I've always been a really gregarious and easygoing person, there are times where you get really frustrated, particularly in politics, because if you are coming at it from this perspective as libertarians, you're quote unquote woke, then you're so very aware of how incredibly harmful the state is to so many different people in different capacities. And there is this urgency because you're like, my God, there are people who are guilty of nothing other than violating a completely ill-founded and specious law, rotting in a jail cell right now. There are people on death row who have been put there through prosecutorial misconduct and will die in the gallows or the firing squad if you're in Utah if we don't do something. Or there are men or women being sent overseas to kick a hornet's nest in a different part of the world, and all for what? For material gain and to perpetuate a vicious cycle of war. Like, we know this, and it's terrifying. So sometimes when you're talking to somebody who is not there at all or not there quite yet, there's a little bit of a feeling like you want to just shake them. Like, how do you not see? And you get so frustrated because you hear the same objections over and over and over again. And you're like, why do I have to keep arguing the whole third-party candidates don't steal votes? Your candidate isn't entitled. If you look at Ross Perot, it was pretty evenly siphoned. And anyway, more than half the populace goes out to vote. Like, you get tired of that, and then you get angry.
Right.
But rather than doing that, because of having children and having learned patience, you do realize that we are all, as human beings, not just as children, but as human beings. Excuse me. I'm going to have a dry throat. Let me take a sip of water.
Okay.
Excuse me. Okay. You realize that we as human beings are always on a journey. And in fact, that's sort of the core concept that undergirds libertarianism. Not everybody arrived here because we read Rothbard or we got really, really, really into Austrian economics. Although the free market's awesome, I love it. Most of us came here because there was something else that felt like we weren't able to truly self-actualize, or whatever, find nirvana or achieve bliss, or whatever term you want to give to it, to finding our point and purpose. And so we explored, like, what is it about my environment or world that is preventing me from being the person I am capable of being? And we realized that it's other people under the guise of a populist mandate sitting in the halls of government making the decision about what is or isn't right for our lives.
Right.
We are always, it's like Joseph Campbell says, we are on a hero's journey, every single one of us as people. We, as far as we know, because you can't substantiate what's based on faith, as far as we know, there is no second chance. There is no other life. There is no something beyond. If there is, that's awesome, that's great, but we're not certain. So we have this finite timeline to figure it out and be the best we can be before we shuffle off this mortal coil. And the best thing that we can do, the most ethical thing we can do, is achieve true liberty, because that's the only way everyone else will be able to find their own path, So that's something that's just sort of been like endemic about civilizations since the inception of them, is that as soon as you got three people together, one of them was trying to tell the other two what was truth. Everybody has to arrive at it on their own. We can have a dialogue. We can exchange information. You have your experience, I have mine. There's a wealth of information between. We should absolutely have that, but this is the journey that we're on, and we need to be able to achieve this so that we can, as individuals and as a society, be better than what we are. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying? I know it's like a little existential, but
No, it definitely does make sense, and I mean, I studied existential psychology extensively, and it was really nice to hear you bring up Joseph Campbell. So, so I mean, a couple of thoughts on this. My strategy has been to try to talk to people from where they are, because if you come at them with taxation is theft and all of these things, you're not meeting them where they are. You're just talking at them.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's been my experience. And another thing that unfortunately that I have seen was I started this meetup group here locally, that was mainly just a philosophy and psychology discussion group. And we had four libertarians in there that were so obnoxious
Oh.
that I had to kick them out of the group.
They're like, I didn't want to be part of your group anyway. I'm libertarian. You're like, oh my God.
We would be in the middle of a discussion of some book by Spinoza, and we're talking about that, and then they'll just start yelling taxation and stuff, and it was just disruptive.
Are you serious? Like they legit interrupted your guys' meeting to just yell taxation is theft?
Yes, they were in my group.
That's such a meathead thing to do. Like
Yeah.
what the hell?
I mean, they were all guys in their early 20s, and they were all very eager, and um, they were
They
just
sprayed themselves with a beer and then chest bumped.
yeah,
Yeah, taxation is theft.
right, yeah, yeah, and the fedora hats.
Oh, yeah, no, I love that you said that you have to talk to them from their experience. I think that's something that I cannot tell you how many times I've been at events and, will invariably meet somebody who is not a libertarian. And then there's this sort of rabid, excitable desire by libertarians to get in there and just convince the shit out of them in one go. And sometimes it makes me think of the night at a Roxbury, where when the waitress walks in between the two guys dancing, they just like bump her until she drops everything in her hands and runs away. Like, God, when you talk to people, you need to be so totally mindful. Everybody in the Libertarian Party needs to read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yes.
It should be common sense, but it's not. So for everyone in the back who's never heard these things, when you talk to people about themselves. They love to talk about themselves. You remember their name. That's a really good thing to do. You keep it positive. Like there's basic stuff, but we have not mastered that art. It's astonishing, honestly, how so many really beautiful, passionate people forget. And maybe it is that fear. Like if we don't do something now, it'll only get significantly worse, and I can't bear that,
Right. Well, there's also the other part to it, which John and I call it LPD. It stands for Libertarian Personality Disorder.
Okay, I gotta hear this. Is it in the DSM-5?
Yes, I think it is.
All right, sock me the symptoms. I want to know if I rate.
No, I think you actually don't qualify.
Oh, I guess I'm not a real one then.
Yeah, that's it. You're a fake libertarian.
Okay, that's cool.
But you know what I mean. It's this overwhelming eagerness and kind of, it's not necessarily even always condescension, but it's just too pushy.
Yeah, it is. And that's so tough. It's so tough to balance the delicate art of interpersonal communication with that fear and that frustration. And I think that's, even in a wider sociopolitical sense, there's a concept in political science called the frustration aggression hypothesis.
Yes.
Basically, what it posits is that when people are frustrated for whatever reason, but it could be economically, they could have a lack of opportunity, they could be frustrated in their interpersonal relationships, whatever the case may be, that builds, and then they aggress. And when they don't know who to aggress against, they typically turn closer to home. And that's the sort of situation we're in here culturally, where you have these just little eruptions of frustration all across our nation. And I think that as libertarians, we basically feel like the Cassandras, where we have the gift of insight and the ability to see that the future is not bright. And we're begging people, please listen to me, and nobody believes us. So that's so difficult to balance that, to, recognize that when you speak to people, they're not there. They're not there. They haven't thought these things before. This is mind blowing. If you think about how closely people cling to their political identity, it is on par with one's religious identity, with one's sexuality, with one's, gender assignation, or their biological sex, or whatever other thing that is so very close and intimate into shaping their identity. So when you tell them a core aspect of their identity, their political ideology, is built on a mountain of lies, you've effectively shot their parents and killed Santa Claus. That's a major shock. So you have to recognize that and be empathetic to it, because even though we're here and we're all bought in and we're almost on the verge of Jonestown's in this thing, because we get a little loony sometimes. Even though we're all bought in, we started from that place too. And good, kind people are what got us here, not being shouted down and being told that we're bad.
Right. And I think that's something that I think that you are excellent at it. I think that some other people, I won't name names, are not so good at it.
We have an interesting group of peeps.
No kidding.
Yeah. My scrap. I was joking with Alicia Dern about making a scrapbook. And I was like, it's going to be interesting. I don't think they make these kind of shapes to put in them, so I'm going to have to get them special ordered.
Oh, I love Alicia. Yeah, she and I talk all the time, and we're always joking around. And we were asking her to come back to run for chair.
Oh, yeah.
For 2020. My friend and I were asking her the other day, and she said, I don't know. I don't. She probably won't do it, but yeah, we talk about all the stuff with her, and she has a really good approach too. She knows how to talk to people like you do.
Yes, she does.
Yeah. No,
The reason why I'd even talked to her this evening is that I had been thinking of her. And so I sent her a message just to say, because I've known her since 2016, we've been swimming around in the paddling pool of social media, and she's always been very kind and even-handed in any conversation I've ever seen her in. Yes. Even if she fundamentally disagrees with somebody, she still does it in such an incredibly well-reasoned and even-handed way. And I very much appreciate that about her. So I messaged her just to say, hey, I appreciate this about you. It's very refreshing to see that, because sometimes that gets lost in the screaming and all the screams.
Now, I'm guilty of some screaming.
Yes, but it's screaming with humor.
Yes. And usually, I think all of us have a hot button.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is immigration,
mm-hmm.
which is the next topic we wanted to talk about.
Oh, that's a good segue.
Ha. So I don't know if you even saw that, but when your running mate published the original plank that you guys had about immigration, there were a few people, and I was one of them, and also Adam Bates and some others, I think Andy Craig, there were a few people that challenged it and said, that don't Stockholm immigration to welfare.
Mm-hmm.
And then you guys changed it. But that's as far as my involvement, that's all I know about it. So your thoughts, like how do you want to see it? How do you want for people to be able to immigrate to the United States.
Okay. Well, since you're bringing up the whole dialogue internally about the, initial placeholder sentence that I had written, I was the one who wrote it. So just to own that, so nobody thinks that, because at some point I think someone was saying it was the fault of our webmaster. It was just a short blurb. It was like my topical description, and then we were going to come back and actually have a well fleshed out piece, because all these topics, they can't always necessarily be easily distilled into a singular sentence. So it wasn't the best language in the world, but it wasn't intended to be anything other than functionally a placeholder, because we wanted to get a website up. And the nice thing about people objecting to that, granted, some people got very heated about it, and that's fine. But what was nice about people in the own party having looked it over and then brought it to our attention is it pointed out the necessity for us to clarify our position. So that is good, because even though, John and I have both been in the Libertarian Party for 10 years, there are different topics you talk about on a local level than you necessarily talk on a federal level. And I've never campaigned actively. This is the first time I've ever really been out front in this capacity. I've helped other candidates and I've written things, but I've never actually campaigned for office. So there are things that seem like they make sense to me in my mind when I'm writing it, but that doesn't necessarily translate. And because of how complex and nuanced the topic of immigration is, it needed more information, and we should have held off before going live. But I'm glad people vocalized a concern, and it gave us, made us better. We're better for it. So thank you.
Oh, sure. And, it wasn't, we are not your opposition, obviously.
No, and that's usually how you have to kind of take it anyway. I mean, unless people are just saying things about you that are so completely out to lunch, like a character assassination. Most people's concerns are legitimate concerns, because really they are just as scared as we are, and they want to be successful. Like, they want the Libertarian Party to succeed. Yes. That's why the largest objection about us ever has been, you don't have any name recognition. The probability of you getting big time donors seems unlikely due to that fact. And we don't want to blow this, because these are terrifying times we live in, which I am completely, I get that. I am so there with you. That is my sincere fear as well. And, I did not do this for my ego at all. Like, if I wanted to feel bad.
Yeah, you don't seem like a kind of person who's just doing this to get some fame at all whatsoever.
I wouldn't even know what to do with it. Like, I love what I do for a living, like, I genuinely enjoy the job that I have and my life. I just want government off of our backs is really what it boils down to. So, and I had hoped that because we do have such amazing people in the party, like people who are unsung heroes. There's certain folks that we know and recognize because they've been in a much more face forward capacity. But there are people who are on a much more local level who are just incredible. And they have just as every right to step up and speak out. And I was hoping that by me being, your typical average activist in the Libertarian Party, as opposed to somebody of celebrity, I would encourage everybody else of that same, because there's way more of that, to stand up and speak out too. So now I'm going off on a tangent. I want to answer your immigration question out of courtesy to you, and of course to seem like I'm not dodging a bullet. So
I know you're not dodging, and we can go on tangents. That's okay.
Well, anyway, to circle back to your original question, ideally, I would love it if we had completely open borders. I would love it if we got to a point where we eliminated the construct of a political boundary. We just eschewed it entirely. And we got to a point where it really just came down to strictly a matter of private property. It's up to you as an individual to determine who you want on your property or not, your house, your rules, or you as a neighborhood to build your community in whatever fashion you see fit and allow in or don't allow in. But when you get to a point at a much larger scale where you start telling people no, they can't, and you give bullshit criteria to vet people, and then you have extraordinarily long wait lists, and you have to pay a huge amount of money to immigration lawyers, and you're still treated like a second-class citizen, even if you did all that right. Like that's totally wrong. That's completely wrong. So just to give you a little bit of background.
Mm-hmm.
So my family I am third generation American. I'm third generation American, but my dad grew up with this fellow, Elliot Freireich, who is a newspaper publisher out here, and they've been best friends since high school. And Elliot's folks, Mr. and Mrs. Freireich, sort of stepped in as surrogate grandparents to my brother and I after my dad's folks passed. They had died when we were about 5 or 6 years old. And so they kind of stepped into that role. And Mrs. Freireich was from Germany, and her dad had been a physician at the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. And so, having seen the political atmosphere and climate and recognizing the writing on the wall, he decided that him and his wife and their two girls needed to move elsewhere. And they got sponsorship. They had a patient of his who was based in, I believe, Minnesota, who had said basically, yeah, I'll take you on. I'll help you find housing. I'll help you find a job. I'll look out for you. And that's precisely what they did. And that's how they were able to leave Germany before it got so bad, because as Jews, they would not have survived. And indeed, her folks, not her folks, but her grandparents, both of her grandmothers perished in the Holocaust. So that's something that's incredibly important, both in terms of escaping a negative political environment and, of course, seeking asylum in a positive one. We should be able to do that, absolutely. So that's the ideal, where instead of negotiating what we should have as a border, as a nation, we instead permit people as individuals to make that decision on their own private property, and everything else is public land and free to traverse. So
Right.
that's what the goal is. And even though I know what's sort of picking up steam and I sort of like the idea, is what Larry Sharpe proposed, which was an Ellis Island style method of immigration. But
Yes.
the issue with Ellis Island is that a lot of those folks didn't necessarily have advocates here for them. So I sort of prefer, much more so, just because of Mrs. Freireich's experience and having heard about it from her, I love the idea of sponsorship, because it's beneficial twofold. One, it creates an advocate in a community for a family, so there is more of an opportunity to build that relationship there. And then the second aspect is the community as the last bulwark against tyranny. If we start looking inward to ourselves as individuals and to communities to solve some of these things that concern us as empathetic human beings, we will stop seeking assistance from the government and thereby eliminate the amount of control they have over our lives. So I think that would be incredibly beneficial. And then
Okay.
there are tertiary issues rolled into it. I've talked about ending the war on drugs to get rid of that whole, oh, there's the cartels nonsense. Like, you created the black market, guys. And, stopping the assault on the Second Amendment rights, because that would eliminate that whole, but they're running guns across the border. Like, no, that's just called international shipping, And, there's other things that are rolled into it, of course. And then welfarism is something that is relevant, and not just in terms of benefits, because in terms of immediate recognizable benefits, most people who are here illegally have identification and social security cards. And when they work above the table because they have these falsified documents. So they're paying into a system that they'll never be able to take out of. So
Yeah.
it's sort of a specious argument in its own right, but people falsely conflate welfarism with it. And there are, of course, other aspects of welfarism, such as public education or hospitals. So you have to privatize all of that stuff, and you have to ensure that we have sponsorship. And that, there is no sort of this, then that, just it needs to happen in tandem.
Okay. I like what you're saying so far. I want to tell you about something. Did you know that sponsorship is actually required for any type of immigrant visa as of currently since 1996? So
I did not know that.
yeah,
Thank you
so
for telling me that. So how does it, I'm assuming by your accent you are indeed an immigrant. Could you tell me about your experience so I understand it better?
yeah, there are only I'm not only an immigrant. I know immigration law inside and out, and I'm in international law attorney, and I worked with ACLU.
Damn, you are a friggin' expert. Let's do this. I
Yeah.
could use your insight.
So here's the deal. Sponsorship is required for any type of an immigrant visa, whether it is family or employment. There's no other one really. I mean, there's refugee status, which is a little bit different, but that's rare. But mostly it's employment or family.
Okay.
But you have to qualify first, so as far as somebody immigrating here through family, you're only qualified if you are a, a parent, a child, or a spouse. Okay.
So, I'm sorry,
All the other relatives are not qualified.
so what does that mean precisely? Does that mean like in order for a wife to come here, her husband would already have to be here and would sponsor her?
He would have to be a U.S. citizen and has to sign an affidavit of sponsorship. Yes.
But if it was an entire family, like a husband, wife, and kids or whatever, and they decided that they wanted to move here,
They
they, without having those people there, even if they had, aunts and uncles, they couldn't get sponsorship?
No,
Oh,
no, they can't. So you can sponsor a sibling, but there are particular quotas on every country, depending on which administration is in town,
mhm.
in-house, so to say. And for example, if you were a US citizen who had a sister from Mexico and you want to sponsor her, you are willing to sign a sponsorship affidavit and everything. She still isn't eligible to come, and the waiting line is 21 years.
Jeez. So
Yeah,
basically all it is just another means for the government to collect data on you because it's not going to manifest in any meaningful change in your life or circumstances.
no, but no, the sponsorship thing is for in case that immigrant ends up going on welfare at some point, you will be the one who will be responsible. That's what the
Okay.
sponsorship is about. But just to get sponsorship, you have to already qualify on these very, very narrow standards that most people don't even qualify for.
So what in your estimation, based on, this wealth of experience and knowledge that you have, what do you think would be the ideal situation and the most intelligent way of achieving that?
Okay, well, you probably have guessed that I thought about it a lot.
Well, you did say it was a hot topic for you, so I'm assuming with the career and the background and the hot topic part, you might care a little bit.
Yes, let people come. I think there needs to be a separation of understanding here between refugees and immigrants, because refugees are literally coming from war zones. They've lost everything and they do
Right.
need some financial support initially. And I'm okay with that. Currently, what they get, I think it's about 6 months of support, and they participate in all these programs that get them to find a job, teach them English, and all of these things, and it's always a success. It's always a success. They're always out on their feet, just living their lives, minding their own business in a very short time. But I think that those people really do need that initial support, and they deserve it because, well, we're the ones who bombed their country usually.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a non-governmental option that you think could achieve that?
Most of these programs are done by private charities, by the way.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So it's not necessarily that government, the state is giving them some sort of benefit or whatever, that they're actually getting it from their local community or whatever.
Um, I mean, it's kind of complicated to explain because it is government, but it's run by nonprofits.
Okay.
Yeah. So it works. It works just fine. We don't have any problems with refugees. We really, really don't. As far as immigration goes, let people come. Just, don't require them to jump through hoops and be married to somebody, or,
Hmm.
you know, like these weird things that just bar people who are productive, people who can improve our society from living here peacefully. Just let them come, and like maybe have a criminal background check, okay, and that's it. They're not, immigrants are the type of people who are so brave that they are willing to leave their home, their familiar environment, learn a completely different culture. People who are that brave are usually also that brave in business, in communities. They're the ones who create everything. So let them come. That's where I stand.
I love that. I want to pick your brain more, and I'm probably could talk to you for the rest of the podcast about this, but no, I love that. Do you no are there certain things that you see in the immediate situation that, because let me back this up a little bit. There was something that I had listened to on, it was actually This American Life, and because I really like to listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of the things they were talking about was this gal who had been a translator for the Marine Corps in Iraq, and she had sought asylum in our country, and then they kept creating all these other restrictions that prevented her from doing so. But in the same token, because of her participation, she was in concern for her life. What sort of changes would you make in that capacity to help ease her ability to relocate sooner, especially in a situation where her aiding the U.S. military puts her at extraordinary risk?
I mean,
we'll be honest. We would not be there in the first place. Am I right? But since we're there, what do we do?
well, here's the thing. I mean, I quit my job 3 months ago because it is too frustrating, because our system is so dysfunctional that, I did a lot. I tried. I can't fix this. I can't fix this without it just getting thrown out and starting over.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe it. The more research I do into things and the more reading I do about stuff in different areas, criminal justice is one that I told you is hugely important to me because it is something that I would actually be able to deal with on the federal level. Mm-hmm. It's sometimes it's such a cat's cradle that's been created by all these different spider webbings of government agencies and policies. Rather than get rid of something that didn't work, they just layer something else on top of it. So it's this circuitous, unintelligible nonsense. And there is sort of a point in time where you're like, we are so far afield from what we were trying to do. We need to just burn it all down and start over. It really does feel that futile.
Right. The other thing that I think that was that slight point of contention that I had with what you guys posted, and we already went over that, but there's a lot of false information that's being distributed as a scare tactic. For example, there's an immigration crisis when the reality is that immigration, both legal and illegal, has been on a steady downward spiral, basically, for the past 20 years. Mm-hmm. So, all of a sudden, there's an immigration crisis. There isn't one. This is completely manufactured.
Oh, yeah. That's yeah, we talked about, I haven't talked to you about this, but I've talked about this on other podcasts before. And even in the speech I gave in 2016 for the National Convention for Daryl, I talked about this very thing, which is that basically it's this rotating cast of the undesirable other. It doesn't matter, what generation or age it is. There's invariably going to be some massive outgroup that we're told to direct our attention and disdain toward. And it just happens to be that this tidal wave is not people themselves, but immigration as a concept. Like, this is our new other that this is the windmill we're supposed to as a society tilt toward because the politicians say so. But you're right. Like, immigration is not a crisis.
No,
It hasn't been for a very long time. They
no.
make it sound like there's just this, that the earth rumbled, and then from the bottom of South America all the way up, people just like rolled off the mountainside and like flipped into our nation. They make it sound like a magician shaking out a tablecloth. It's full of people coming into America. And that's not the case. I live in a border state. We don't have just this influx of people from Mexico. We have a
No.
lot of folks from Mexico. That's a fact. That's just proximity. But we don't have, this, it's not this crisis. Most of these people have been here for, at this point, 1 or 2 generations. They're no longer technically immigrant. So you're right. Like, it is false information. There's a lot of false information. And this is the unfortunate thing about even discussing this topic. It shouldn't be this hot button topic. It feels like a political red herring in a lot of ways. The second aspect of it is just how much garbage you have to verbally dig through in order to be able to say, therefore, I think people should be able to come to this country if they so desire, and we should be able to leave if we so desire,
Yes.
because of all this misinformation. You have to talk about welfare because everybody else is talking about it. In order to prove that it's not a thing, you have to kill that argument first. It is so frustrating. And, it's like, I know it's a topic of the election cycle. And that was one thing that when we started, it's like, well, you're going to have to take an opinion on immigration. I'm like, I love it. Like, immigration is good. So they're like, we need to do more than that. I'm like, no, let's talk about something else.
And I think it's a hot button topic for me personally because I'm a first generation immigrant. I came here by myself when I was 14.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You're right. Talk about bravery. I couldn't do that at 14. 14, I was a big baby.
Yeah, you know what? It was a scholarship program and I had to travel all over the country. It was sponsored by the US government, actually.
What was it for?
It was after the Soviet Union fell apart, and they thought it was a good idea to bring in some kids from the Soviet Union to talk to, I mean, I went to high school. I lived with a host family, but I also went and talked to Rotary clubs, colleges, universities, and middle schools and everything.
If you don't mind me asking, where were your folks?
They were in Georgia, the country, not the state.
Yeah, no, I figured as much. So they remained there while you were on this tour / educational experience?
Yes, and then I came back to go to college here, also on a scholarship, and then I stayed.
Wow.
Right, but it was easier back then than it is now. And I have always felt welcome until I would say the past year or so. And I'm going to share this experience that just happened a couple of days ago. I was in a board meeting online, it was a voice meeting with me, well, with our caucus. And there was somebody there that's not a member of the board or anything. And I was talking about the language in this thing that we wrote up, right? And I said, we have to change illegal aliens to undocumented persons. And this guy just said, oh, you must be undocumented. Show me your documentation here in the US.
And then an LPRC meeting? That's crazy. Was he a member of the, he have to be. They don't just like.
Yeah, he's a member, but, they told him, you have no chance of being anywhere on the board here. And yeah, it was really awful. But
oh, was he interviewing for a state coordinator position?
Yes.
Oh my God. All right. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I know. This is too much inside information, but
right.
I was just giving an example of how I was treated, I had never been treated that way up until about a year ago, when people are like, oh, you're an immigrant?
Yeah.
Are you illegal? Really? Yeah,
You're like, I'm over the age of 18 and not for you.
yeah, right?
Mhm.
It's just really unpleasant. Um, but I want to end this topic with something more pleasant, which is that I think that the LP altogether, regardless of which caucus it is, right, is very, very set on this, that we are for immigration. We want to end all of this tyranny,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not going to change our stance on it ever. And it's been
Yeah.
that way since the 1970s. We haven't
Yeah.
changed our minds about that since then.
Yeah, I love the fact that there are, like, I very much love our platform, and I especially love our statement of principles. And I
Yes.
really think that it's just such a good anchor for us. There was actually a period where there have been some proponents of removing certain planks because they objected to the statement, or they wanted to condense and consolidate the platform or eliminate it in its entirety. And this purpose of the platform is to basically take the overarching concept of the SOP and then translate it into meaningful policy and position. So I love it. I think it's great. And even the topic of abortion, I appreciate the fact that they do make the point of being compassionate toward both positions and then saying, but we do not support having government intervention. Like, this is something the government has no business being on. And then it's up to the individual to make the determination on what position they want to hold and how they wish to conduct their lives.
Right. Right. So, I mean, this discussion is so great so far. Let's take a little bit of a break, and we'll be right back
Okay.
to our next topics.
Okay. Sounds good.
Hello, everyone. We are back, and we have another guest with us who also happens to be a presidential candidate. John, can you please introduce yourself to us?
Well, I mean, sure. I am Genghis coming here. I knew you were doing presidential interviews, and I figured I shouldn't be left out. I feel like my campaign has the strongest chance of winning.
Mm-hmm.
Never mind that I'm technically not even old enough, but since when do libertarians care about like laws and stuff?
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah. So I don't know. I appreciate you bringing me on. I hope to have an interesting conversation regarding presidency of the LP.
Okay. Okay. So,
Just for clarification, are you running for president of the Libertarian Party, or are you running for president of the United States?
Well, really just the president in general. And I haven't been officially endorsed by the LP at all.
I'm going to get you a sash. You need a sash. And you need a sash that says the president.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you for the first time.
Yes, you as well. And you've been nothing but civil to me thus far. I appreciate that.
Oh,
I do.
you're welcome.
Yeah. Anyway, my first well, okay, joking aside though, as a student of political science, and I've worked a little bit with like GOP here in the state in the past. My brother was the chair of the actual Libertarian Party here in the state for a little while. Like, and I'm kind of a person who's generally more interested in like the nuts and bolts aspect of a political party, a political machine, and less so the policy positions. Like, there's going to be tons of debate about what's the right thing to do regarding issues, whatever. I'm more interested in figuring out how we grow the party so that whatever it is decided that the right policy positions are, reach the max amount of people that it can. And that said, I just curious if you have any insights or any ideas into how the Libertarian Party may improve its outreach to people.
Okay. Hmm. Well, I actually just got asked this like relatively recently by another person in the Libertarian Party. The way that we achieve this is, one, we ensure that we have no misunderstanding whatsoever on what it means to be a libertarian. There are some core values that undergird our political philosophy and ideology, and those need to be understood and maintained.
Sure.
Additionally, have
Sure, I
strong
agree.
additionally, we need to have strong leadership that is able to take on that position and recognize that even though we eschew the concept of leaders and we eschew the idea of anyone being able to dictate or guide or be face forward, we still are people who are driven by and influenced by those we can look up to and respect. We appreciate a leader just as much as we are capable of being a leader. And some people prefer to honestly be followers, which is okay. Just make sure you are mindful of who you're following. So, strong leadership to be able to articulate that message and set an overarching goal for the party. Because you're talking about the party in and of itself. And that
Yes.
has dual purpose, which is one, to educate the public writ large, and two, make sure that they have a vehicle by which people can get elected to office. Those are the two main functions of a political party, as they should be. So we need someone who's able to articulate that, steer that ship, and keep on course. And then additionally, we just need to have membership that is much more empathetic. This circles back to what we had talked about at the beginning of the show, which was just communicating with people in general. If we as members recognize we have the capability of being a steward and an educator just as much as those in leadership positions, and we take more of an active role and responsibility there, then we can help encourage people to join and get involved. So there's that aspect. We need to know what the heck we're talking about. We need to be bold about it and stand out front, and we need to be kind and bring people in. I sound like a horoscope. I think I covered all the emotional reactions.
Well, I would frankly say that emotional, as a person who's more like interested and studied in how to reach people as opposed to what with what you're reaching them, you're absolutely right. Emotional is how people vote. It's science, like it's demonstrated. So
Right.
I like a lot of what you said there, frankly. More empathic for sure is important. There is a serious issue, in my opinion, with the libertarian movement, with people who tend to just be a little like arrogant and overly bombastic. You know.
I would settle for some bombacity. I'm not sure how to conjugate that, but
Sure,
yeah.
sure, yeah. All right, well, and being bold as well. And when you said specifically that someone who can articulate what it's that the party stands for clearly and concisely, I think that is also very, very important. Very important, because I think there's a bit of an identity crisis in the Libertarian Party.
Agreed.
Yeah, all right. Glad you do. And I think that's how you solve that, though, is that whoever rises to the top of the pack, or becomes more or less what is going to be the face of the party going into 2020. If that person can articulate the positions very well, knows what they're doing, and is bold about it, that would do a lot to cut down this libertarian meme of "you're not a real libertarian."
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So, all right, I appreciate your answer on that.
Well, you're
And
very welcome. Thank you for asking.
yeah, and my next question then is kind of a follow-up to that, is simply, in your own campaign, can you think of anything that you might be in need of personnel wise? Like, do you need people who can like knock on doors? Do you need people to be on phones, or like anything at all? Is there anything that you can put out here right now as a call to the rest of the libertarians, what you might need?
We could use all of it. I mean, we could absolutely benefit from all of it. And it really is just whatever your strengths are, what your area of interest or expertise is. Get a hold of us and let us know. You might be best suited or happiest working in a more local capacity, doing phone banking, or just the one time that you happen to have a free day, writing letters. Something as simple as that is enormous help. Donating if you don't have the time, but if you have the financial resources, that's a huge help. If you are media and you want to interview us, again, that's a huge help. Every person that functions in the Libertarian Party, and I shouldn't say the Libertarian Party, that is a small microcosm of the greater picture, which is the liberty movement as a whole. Every person who is actively doing something that both captivates and excites them and is positive is already helping our campaign. But there are things that you can do to help us directly as well. This is very much an all hands on deck kind of situation. We all need to work in tandem together. You don't have to necessarily work with somebody you don't like or doing something you don't enjoy, but you can absolutely participate as well, and we'll help you find an opportunity wherever you'd like to do it.
And how would anyone who is interested in working with you contact you and let you know?
Well, you can go to our website, which is ruffphillips2020.com. You can find us on Facebook at Kim Ruff /Don Phillips POTUS and POTUS in 2020. We also are on Twitter and Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest. And then, of course, you can messenger me on Facebook. A pretty easy way to get a hold of me if you don't have my phone number or email.
All right. So the website basically has all the contact information.
Yeah, it is a very generic form that they can fill out, and then we can have our field directors do outreach. And we're very much social media based anyway. The campaign, not just the campaign.
The entirely liberty movement is social media based.
Very much so, and a lot of the people that work on our campaign are very active on social media. So truly, if you're on Facebook and you look up Michelle McCutcheon or Tyler Smith, those two are the co-directors of field development, and they're really, really good and have a lot of resources and connections and can help place people in areas doing things that they want to do. So that is very easy to get a hold of us.
All right, well, there you have it, Liberty lovers. Now you have no excuse. We're heading into an election cycle. If you want to get involved, go onto the website. Figure out how you can.
Yeah, or I'll make them.
Or you'll make them. So there was something that you wanted to ask me about.
Me?
Yes.
Yes. So we had this topic on our agenda, which is called "Silence is not consent."
Mm-hmm.
And I assume this is in reference to the tweet that was made by the Libertarian,
yes.
Official Libertarian.
That, and we can also just kind of look at the statement on face value too. So
yeah, it's what we were talking about yesterday when we first exchanged numbers and we're speaking in person was basically that sort of seems to be the overarching theme with the liberty movement or Libertarian Party or even the campaign since that whole thing blew up with that tweet. And even though I understand the concept behind the tweet, the sentiment being like, you need to get involved, you need to participate, you need to speak out, it's still a very tone-deaf tweet to put out in the time of the Me Too movement, as well as the recognition that we are, ironically, I guess, given what we tweeted, we eschew that concept of there being a tacit agreement or social contract with a government to justify its ability to use force or fraud against you. So to that end, like even our own country's foundation is basically built on silence is not consent. Like basically we do not consent.
I could not agree more.
Yeah, so it was very interesting and weird. But then to roll off of that, if you look at sort of the cultural waves that are going on within our group of people that are interconnected on social media, that sort of same thing reverberated in the rumor mill, where you had things that were said about other people, and it was presumed that if you didn't speak up or out about them, then you were tacitly consenting to their supposed misdeeds. And that is just outrageous. Like, I don't like the idea that we are going to go around and finger wag at people because they didn't know better or they just don't want to get involved in a particular BS conflict. Like,
well, it's never been my experience that condescending and finger wagging at somebody gets them to do what I want them to or help in any way. You know?
Depending on who you're wagging your finger at, it's a good way to get it broken.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, why would you shame people? I think that was just so. Why would you shame people?
I feel like it's self-indulgent in a lot of cases, you know. Like,
yeah, it comes from the same sort of hubris that we were discussing overall, but particularly in this second half. It's the same sort of hubris in which you, as a libertarian, have this like smug self-righteousness because you have, you now get it, you now understand,
you're now woke to the nature of power and
exactly. And then there's almost sort of an arrogance, like a comic book guy type mentality where it's just like, oh, you don't get it, like I guess it's cool, but I'm sorry, didn't we stop calling people posers after high school? Like, wasn't that something we're supposed to leave there? Why are we still doing that in every other facet of our lives? Like, in your normal job, do you ever have people be like, you're not a pure whatever the hell you do for a living? Like,
would you be willing to help me out with this task, you poser?
Yeah, right? That's awesome. I so want to hang out with you because that's not a therapy moment.
Yeah. Please tell me more about how you know everything and I know nothing.
Oh, yeah. You cannot believe how many people are subject matter experts in areas they don't know anything about.
Absolutely everything.
Yeah. Like, straight up. What's the most authentic thing to do? Admit when you're wrong and learn something. Like, we never stop growing. Christ, just because I'm running for president, just because both of us are running for president, doesn't mean we couldn't possibly learn something new every minute of every day. So why would you take that tack that you know all the things, and if other people don't know all the things, then they're morons?
Well, once again, agree 100% with you there. And,
well, I one-upped both of you. I'm not running for president. I'm running for the Dark Lord.
The Dark Lord. That is the most honest campaign I have ever heard of, and I applaud it.
I mean, the office of the presidency, I've always thought, should be renamed to something like the Dark Lord.
Yeah, let's just own it. Like, can we, like, Lord Voldemort, like, he cannot be named. Like, we cannot speak his name or title lest our face melt off.
Yes, I am running for Dark Lord. So.
Well, and I'm running for just president.
Okay. So we have a lot of ambition.
Oh my God, it's so participation prize. Like, I want to get you like a giant hat and a ticker tape parade now. Like, he's here, president.
The president.
The president. What's he president of? Everything. Nothing. He's an enigma.
Just president. What do you mean of? What do you mean of?
But look at the sash. It looks very official.
Yeah.
He has a monocle.
Yes. So we have the president, the other president.
Well, a candidate for the presidency of the LP.
Okay, candidate for the presidency from the LP. Yes. And we have the Dark Lord. So this is really good company.
I feel like I just made a deal with the devil. I thank you for my superior fiddle playing skills. The shallow way.
Okay, John, did you have any more questions for Kim?
I guess just one last one. It's are you capable of a humble acceptance when the Genghis campaign crushes you and everyone else underfoot?
Well, yes, I think so. I like what you have to say. Some of it's really out to lunch, but the fact that you top it off with "you matter" makes me feel good. And so I'm voting for you.
You see, exactly. Emotional appeal.
So what did you have? It was something about like a giant meteor or something, like some space rock. We were gonna populate some sort of territory, and then
Oh, it's asteroid mining.
asteroid.
Asteroid
Yeah,
mining.
right. I was like,
Right, as a
this
primary
guy,
focus, like just. Yeah.
this guy's got an eye for the future.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would be very happy if you got the nomination.
Well, I think a few species of grass and trees to whom would receive rights after the fact are also very happy about it.
I have
Well,
no idea what that means. Um, but moving on, Kim, as I informed you yesterday, neither I or John know how to bake anything. So can you please teach us how to bake something?
okay. So the recipe I pulled for you
Yay!
is
And write it down.
okay. It's port soaked pear and Gruyere pie.
Ooh, fancy.
Sounds
Well, okay, let me give you the backstory. There was a TV show that ran for 2 seasons called Pushing Daisies. It was very whimsical. It was about a guy who basically had the ability to touch things and bring them back to life. And in addition to having sort of a detective story aspect to it and that Wes Anderson type feel cinematically, he also was a pie baker. And one of the pies that his love interest made, she actually made them in cupcake pans so they were more tarts, was this port soaked pear and Gruyere pie. And it sounded so good because I love cheese that I started making it, and it is indeed good. So I'm going to give you the recipe.
it sounds amazing.
Okay. So you're going to need 2.5 cups of all purpose flour,
Okay.
1 teaspoon salt,
Okay.
1 tablespoon sugar,
Okay.
3 ounces of grated Gruyere,
Okay.
20 tablespoons of unsalted butter cut into 1-inch pieces.
Did you just say 20 tablespoons?
Oh, yes. Baking has a lot of butter. Embrace it.
Oh, I love butter. I'm happy to embrace it.
It's embraced me and it won't let go.
Oh, yeah, I love butter. Okay. Butter.
And then the last ingredient is 6 to 7 tablespoons of ice water. This is to make the crust.
Okay.
So in this one with crust, it's very simple. You mix together all the ingredients, the first 4. So it's going to be your flour, salt, sugar, and cheese until it's combined. And then you can use your food processor and mix the flour mixture with the butter until it's kind of clumps into little mini boulders.
Can I use the mixer? Oh,
Yeah, you can use like a food processor. I mean, or a hand mixer is fine, just as long as you make sure that it's consistent. Because
okay.
baking is really more chemistry than it is art. So you have to make sure that your ingredient amounts are correct. That
Yes.
you do things in the correct order. Otherwise, it'll go to seed. So you dump the mixture back into the mixing bowl and add ice water 1 tablespoon at a time. Be sure to mix the water in with a fork before adding the next tablespoon. And then once it begins to clump into the dough, give it a squeeze. If it turns into a lump, you've made it. So basically what it is you're working with the consistency to make it hold together. You split it into 2 discs and you wrap them up and put them in the fridge overnight because it needs to kind of set.
Wrap
And
in
then
plastic wrap, yes?
right. And then when you're done with that, you roll them out into roughly 14 inches, one for your bottom and the other one a 12-inch outside diameter for your top. And you just put them into a pie dish and then go into the filling. So for the ingredients for the filling, it's 1/2 cup of brown sugar.
1/2 cup of brown sugar, is that what you said?
That's right. 4 tablespoons of cornstarch.
Okay, I actually have all of this at my house.
Do you? Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
1/4 of a teaspoon of salt.
Okay, I'm still not gonna measure a 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt.
Okay, then using a mortar and pestle, put in some salt, nutmeg, ginger, and then mix them pretty evenly. And then take out 3/4 of a teaspoon.
Nutmeg. Okay, okay, that makes sense. That's what I do. That's what I usually do. I just mash stuff in
And
my.
dump them together. Yeah. And the only thing that's a lot of is cinnamon. They'll say 3/4 of a teaspoon.
Okay.
Then there's 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract,
Right. Of course.
2 tablespoons of lemon juice,
Okay.
5 cups of pears cored, peeled, and thinly sliced.
Okay. What is that?
It's 5 cups of pears. So you core them, you take out the center, get rid of like where all the
I have
edible
people
stuff
that
is.
does that thing. Yes.
Right. And then you peel them and you slice them thin because you're going to basically like roll those in that solution you make for the filling and then
Gotcha.
put it
Okay.
in. So,
I get it. Okay.
okay. So you go ahead and
This
mix
sounds amazing.
you mix the first 6 ingredients in a bowl and then toss your pears in with lemon juice to prevent browning. So lemon juice is a good hack for you for like apples or pears or anything that once you cut it open and oxygen hits it, it starts to brown. Lemon juice will prevent that. So you toss them in the lemon juice to keep them from changing color, and then you stir them in with the dry mixture, add vanilla, and give it a stir, and then you dump it into the pie dish and dot the pear mix with the remaining butter. Now the port part, if you want to do it, is you legitimately can take the pears ahead of time before you start mixing all this together, and you pour port into a saucepan and soak the pears in it on a very low temperature until they kind of turn that pretty purple, and then go into the rest of this process.
Okay.
Alright.
This. Having watched a lot of YouTube videos, and that's how I learned how to cook. This recipe checks out. This is
Well, we should we maybe make it once.
Well, let me tell you how to cook it real fast. So,
yeah. Well, right. Yeah.
okay, so you're gonna bake for 425,
425.
425 for 15,
Uh-huh.
and then do another 40 to 50 minutes at 350. So you'll brown it up, and then you'll lower the temperature
First at 350 for probably like 45
40
minutes.
to 45 minutes. It's kind of the 40 to 50 minutes is what they say. And then once the crust is brown, you let your pie cool and give it to people to eat.
350 for about 45. I mean, it depends on the oven, right? So
Yeah, that's true.
start checking it out after about 30 minutes.
And she says she doesn't know anything about baking.
Oh, I lie all the time.
That's how she gets you. Because you're convinced that she doesn't know anything, and then she hits you with the goods. She's a ringer.
Yeah, well, that's the quality of a good interviewer.
Kim, thank you so much for this. I am so looking forward to making this, and I'm going to take pictures of it and send them to you.
Well, thank you.
Thank
I
you
appreciate
so
that, and
much.
thank you for your time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you for your time. And I thought it was an excellent conversation. I look forward to it being published and people at large getting to hear it.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. You have a wonderful evening, okay?
Yeah, Kim, thank you so much for coming to my show. This was such a pleasure.
Oh, yeah, I had a lot of fun. And then I was like, oh, shoot, I got to go to work in the morning.
I know. So we won't hold you up any longer. Hugs.
Thanks, honey. You guys have a good night.
You too.
You as well.